The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, 78% say that working in the SOC is very painful. Yikes. On October 20th, Devo is establishing SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to you and encourage organizations to improve SOC analyst job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo as they celebrate SOC analysts around the world and provide opportunities for personal and professional development, all while you unwind with programming specifically designed to help you de-stress. You can also win a Nintendo Switch if you participate in Devo's Twitter hashtag contest. All you have to do is follow at Devo_Inc. on Twitter and tweet using hashtag SOC Analyst Day. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to sign up and learn more.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, including Twitch, where you should probably change your password today.
Absolutely.
For reasons.
Change it immediately. Change it yesterday.
All right. Yeah. There might be passwords in it. They might be encrypted. We don't know yet. Journalists are still digging through the rubble of that data leak. This interview is sponsored by Proofpoint. Ryan Kalember joins us to kick off Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Today, we'll be talking about the latest work and threat research Proofpoint is up to. Ryan leads cybersecurity strategy there, and it's his job to make sure Proofpoint customers have the necessary context into current threats to make the best defensive moves possible. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Great to be here, Adrian.
Did I characterize your job correctly there? Because I was paraphrasing all over the place.
Yeah, more or less. I'm actually also a director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, which puts on National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is now a global thing. So we can check that box. Everybody is now aware of cyber, which is great. Nice to do that every October. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The threat landscape is something that we're incredibly focused on. Obviously, I have the benefit of a massive team of threat researchers that really look into our segment of that world. Targeted attacks, mostly against people, mostly leveraging social engineering, but certainly no shortage of innovation on the attacker side on that front lately.
Yeah, and it almost feels kind of silly to have Awareness Month. It feels like it's because I'm in the industry, but you know, my family used to bring up cybersecurity topics a couple times a year. Maybe 10 years ago, something security related would be in the news that maybe affected them, maybe was just interesting. And now it's weekly. I feel like it's in mainstream news almost constantly.
That has absolutely shifted. And I don't think any of us really have to explain what we do in the way that we did decades ago. But I will say there is some value in Cybersecurity Awareness Month updating kind of the tropes that we've been teaching everybody for a very, very, very long time. Obviously, things like email phishing is still a thing. But one of the things I find interesting is that once you actually get into the details of what actual attacks that the average person might need to be aware of actually look like and how they function, there's some things that are really bad advice that we give out for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Hovering over a link isn't really going to help you these days, but learning not to run a macro in a spreadsheet from somebody you don't trust, that's a lot more valuable. So there are some interesting nuances to it that might be helping your friends and family, Adrian.
Yeah. And looking for the lock symbol.
Right. Exactly. Let's encrypt is a thing now. Looking for the green address bar. All these things that we've been actually trying to drum into people for 20 years with varying degrees of success. those have been largely left behind by the attackers. To your point, the green bar, one of the things that's fascinating about that is that, if you look at where a modern attacker gets their infrastructure, it's trusted cloud services. They're building on the same things that we are. Like, why wouldn't you use Google and Microsoft infrastructure if you can pop a bunch of Office 365 accounts and send your campaigns from there? You can host your payloads there too. And mousing over that link and seeing, oh, it points to OneDrive, that will actually give you a false sense of confidence and make you more likely to click on it and maybe engage with the social engineering. So there are fundamental things that have shifted there, while a lot of the training that we often do as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, or for the rest of the year, of course, hasn't really caught up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting as we shift through that. Passwords are still a big thing. I think we're multi-factor authentication has been available on most big websites for quite a while now, and a lot of people still aren't using them. You still see like some major company's Twitter account get hit where they didn't have 2FA enabled on it because they weren't using proper best practices for multiple people to manage one account. So they had it disabled.
Right. And you have actually, I think, the enterprise flavor of that as well, which tends to be, what you're doing on the Google Workspace or Office 365 side. And even if you do have MFA turned on the obvious interfaces, something that is very much worth paying attention to is whether you have things like basic authentication turned on for non-obvious interfaces. By default, you spin up a new Office 365 tenant, basic auth is still on. Google actually announced, I think was that yesterday?
I saw that. Yeah.
A really interesting move to try and move to multi-factor authentication without people's express consent, which I think is actually a fantastic step. We're going to have to break some of the classic assumptions around user experience if we're ever going to get off some of these treadmills that we've been on for, to your point, way, way, way too long.
But that's a year from now, right?
It is a year from now, and I think you have a similar parallel actually on the Microsoft side, where they said actually they were going to kill basic authentication into O365 tenants in favor of modern authentication. They keep pushing the deadline for that back and back and back. I think they've said it will be at least 12 months notice. So the earliest we could possibly see it is October of 2022. Which does not sound like a time frame I thought I would live through at this point. But ultimately, those moves have to be made, because if not, it's just going to be too easy for the attackers to do the same stuff they've always done, compromise credentials in the same way they've always done it,
right,
and then monetize it in the way that has proven to be really scalable, whether it's ransomware, business email compromise. All these techniques work equally well when you have all those resources at your disposal that we're not taking away from them.
Mr. Robinson, I think we're solidly in your area here.
Absolutely. I'm curious, like from your standpoint and like the visibility you guys are seeing, we haven't seen a real big shift in tactics from, outside of password sprays, right? Like, I think this is a good move in the right direction with things like basic auth going away, but we still end up with end users getting phished. We still have macros. Like I would see something like, people actually enforcing attack surface reduction rules or disabling macros as a bigger, out of the box default for Microsoft. Because at the end of the day, I don't have to really get credentials. I can just phish someone with a macro again. Like, that hasn't changed in the last 10 years. Is that still what you guys are seeing? And why do you think that is?
Oh, 100%. And we really can't spend enough time talking about macros. If you look at every single initial access broker that we track, they are reliant on one of two things. They're reliant on macros, or they're reliant on basically compressed executables, a RAR or a zip or a 7-zip or something, and just sending it to somebody with a password and asking them to just run their code, which is frankly the same thing that a macro is. And for whatever reason, Microsoft, in all the GPO settings and all of the things that you can do to Office to better protect it against macros, has just not made much progress against this. And when you have users running code, that's tough, even for an EDR system to find, right? To differentiate those very normal processes using all the same living off the land binaries that administrative tools use. it's a really hard problem once the user's running that code. And if you look at actually that attack surface reduction, which you very correctly pointed to, we occasionally think, oh, there's going to be a new vulnerability used in targeted attacks. And there was one last month, 4040444, which is, again, I cannot believe I'm saying this in 2021, the way you can use an ActiveX control inside an Office document or an RTF file, because as many of us still remember, there is Internet Explorer still, as much as we think we've gotten rid of it, inside Microsoft Office that is creating exactly this sort of attack surface that attackers have been using for so long, so productively. And even with that vulnerability actually being pretty great and working even through the preview pane, we saw 2 or 3 little campaigns there where we saw millions and millions of the same old macros, the same old compressed executables, the same old socially engineered, please run my code for me type attacks. The one thing that's worth mentioning on the attacker side, we did see an interesting shift in terms of how credential stealing malware works. That does keep up a little bit with 2FA. One of the interesting examples, I think a couple of months ago, was what happened to EA, where they had the Slack token get sold on a interesting marketplace. And then that was used by an attacker to then socially engineer the help desk into giving them a VPN login. Cookie reloading style attacks and making sure you can kind of steal that cookie with malware on the box is a great way to get around kind of traditional credential defenses. So that is a little bit new, but you're absolutely spot on. The attack surface is all kind of what it used to be because Microsoft Office is there and because it's so hard to train people not to run macros from sources they don't trust.
I mean, I think we're at that precipice where we will see kind of that next evolution, and you hinted to it. I've been saying this for probably 2 or 3 years now. Like single sign-on and SaaS are the next Office product for vectors. Like you don't even have to get access to internal networks anymore because of the data that's stored inside of these systems. I mean, you look at Teams, you look at O365, you look at Slack, even just Slack, a simple chat channel. I mean, files are shared, credentials are on there, code snippets end up in there, Git repository links, tokens, all of these single sign-on applications and SaaS applications and their integration into corporate and enterprise networks. This is going to be the next Office. I mean, Office is still there, and we still have IE and ActiveX. Like you said, I can't believe we're saying that in 2021, but that's there for a while, and I believe that will start to go away to an extent, but that doesn't mitigate anything. Even with 2FA, like you said, there's tokens, there's JWTs that are implemented improperly. You end up with cookies, all of these things that are going to be stealable from the browser, which is more and more relied on by end users day to day. This is not going away. So really good layered security and in-depth credential sprawl and user management and training and awareness are all going to be even more critical as we move forward.
So to that point, a question for you, Ryan. How much are we seeing people stealing from the browser, those OAuth keys? Like how they got into EA Games Slack. Basically by buying a stolen OAuth key is what it sounded like. Like, are there big marketplaces for that? Is that I know we've seen malware that will actively steal that stuff as kind of like a side note, right? Like that's not even the main purpose of the malware. It's just like while we're here on the host, we might as well just scoop up all this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, the multifunction modular nature of modern malware, especially the stuff that is designed to scale, absolutely can scoop up OAuth tokens and cookies and all of the various different key material that gets randomly scattered around different places. Like when you're malware on an endpoint right now, it's like a piñata. You're just trying to hit it and see what keys fall out. And it's kind of amazing that, yes, Mimikatz works for Azure AD when you're using browser logins. Like there's all this stuff that we thought we got rid of when we moved to our shiny cloud future that unfortunately still remains the same. I would say there's a couple of things worth paying attention to. Obviously, yeah, OAuth tokens can be sold in various different marketplaces. If you are an initial access broker, you're looking to monetize your access in lots of different ways. The other thing worth paying attention to, though, is basically fake third-party apps that work on OAuth tokens as well. If I'm going to try and phish you and you've got like a FIDO token, right? You're using, what I use, a YubiKey. How do I actually phish that person? That's tougher, right? But if that person can connect an OAuth app, some third-party thing, which can be generated by literally any Office 365 tenant, and they can actually authenticate to that app, meaning go to the real IDP, not actually ever expose their credential, the second factor, whatever it happens to be, to the attacker, but give that attacker an OAuth token that represents that access. That's the sort of thing that we've actually seen done at scale. There's one really fascinating threat actor that was doing that in the US and Mexico, and they were doing it from everything from fake Netflix lures all the way through to impersonating the Mexican tax authorities. And they were just using OAuth apps. So they were kind of our first O365 native threat actor trying to steal huge amounts of OAuth tokens that never expire. And even if you have that user change their password, the OAuth token doesn't die. So that's really reliable, durable access that in a marketplace is going to have value.
And those are hard to audit as well. You start to think about Azure AD or OAuth apps and all the different connections that these have. I mean, you just look at Azure AD and something like the SAML or AD Connect accounts. Like those are hard to audit, and those are highly privileged accounts that do a ton of things, and there's not a lot of apps to audit those. Then you start to talk about apps inside of O365 and all the different connections that end users make and give access to, because by default, they're allowed to do that within the org unless you specifically start to lock that down, which no one is doing. This becomes a very widespread and sprawling set of credentials that, like you said, has long-term ramifications. And cleaning that up, good luck. This is already hard to do on-prem. You start to talk about having to do this at scale for a large org in the cloud on O365.
And some of these SaaS apps, you also don't have very much visibility into what somebody's doing with those tokens. So that you can see. In some of them, you can't even see if they're being used. Like in Google, I can authorize somebody or an application to look through my Gmail, and we saw a case a couple of years ago where there was this unsubscribe app that would go through your email and unsubscribe to things for you, unsubscribe newsletters and spam and all kinds of stuff. And it came out. I'm not sure. A lot of this was rumor, so I'm not sure how much of this was verified, but that Uber wanted access to all those inboxes that this unsubscribe app had, because they wanted to see when people created a Lyft account, and started to move off of Uber. They wanted those data points.
I mean, and that's exactly the sort of thing that an OAuth app would gather in a way that would be non-obvious. And I think to the broader point in this discussion, one of the things that really does matter here is that the attacker has to have a monetization strategy before this becomes a big problem worth actually focusing on. And the monetization strategy for most of the types of compromises that we've just been talking about is business email compromise. Getting into an inbox, figuring out when there's money moving from point A to point B, ideally via wire transfer, understanding that, and then impersonating one of the parties and redirecting those funds. There is a depressing reason why that is, according to the FBI's data, not only the biggest source of cybercrime losses, but bigger than all of the other ones put together. It's a simple attack. There's lots of ways to execute it, and it's accessible to anybody who knows how to find a money mule. And that's really, I think, yeah.
But Ryan, there are some threat actors that don't need to monetize, correct?
True. Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And if that's in your threat model, if you're Twitch today, maybe 4chan's in your threat model, there's lots of actors that definitely don't need to monetize. But if you think about, where our research is focused right now, we're focused on ransomware actors, who again rely primarily on email and other credential attacks. Obviously, there is vulnerability exploitation that happens from time to time, but the lion's share of what they do is still relatively targeted and either malware through the email channel or credential attack. And then the BEC guys. The BEC guys are much more cloud native than other types of actors because they don't have that traditional get that single point of presence, figure out how to drop creds, escalate privilege, move laterally, get to domain admin that a ransomware actor has to do.
Yeah.
But ultimately, a lot of the tradecraft just overlaps because they can use the same tools to do multiple different things.
And often for business email compromise too, you don't have to rely on, or you're not relying on your security. You're often vulnerable just because of the supply chain that you have, the vendors that you deal with. Those are the ones where the attacks are coming in, and you may have the best email security and visibility possible, and email is still going to come in that's spoofed or trying to do the business email compromise for a transaction, and there's nothing you can do about that. That's how business is conducted. They're utilizing the tools against how they're designed to be used. So that's where process and procedure and good playbooks and run books, and frankly, you really have to have an in-depth strategy that utilizes people and those checks and balances outside of technology in order to combat something like this.
Yeah, I think one of the things that scares me the most, one of the trends I've noticed that scares me the most is that a lot of cyber criminals, we're seeing a lot more patience. We're seeing bigger paydays and a lot more patience than we have in the past to get to those. So like in the BEC case, I've seen a lot of cases where they'll compromise an email account and they'll just sit there and learn the business processes for a while, just so that when they do send that BEC email, they know exactly how to time it. I worked one case where, it was a title and loan company, that did commercial real estate. And, these were 7-8 digit transactions. And they were waiting for that 1 hour window when somebody said, okay, it's time to make that transaction. And that's what they would go after, is to try and redirect that.
Exactly. And that's a really good example, but I hate to one up you, but I've got a 9-figure one.
Go for it.
that we were working on not actually just this summer. $194 million actual invoice owed from a very large company to a Chinese company, which had been compromised by a threat actor. And exactly as we were talking about, you're sort of at the mercy of your supply chain security in that sense. But that doesn't mean you can't use any intelligence whatsoever. In this case, actually, the threat actor wasn't just sitting on the email account just to learn how the business process worked. They were also staging malicious payloads there. They were using it for other attacks against other organizations. So even though this particular account only launched legitimate conversations with multiple people in accounts payable, because they were smart enough not to ask for $194 million all at once. They wanted to set up a payment plan. They were using that same compromised environment to do lots of other things. So if you can observe, hey, this is an Office 365 tenant that has all kinds of compromised issues. It's attacking somebody. I know to at least apply a greater degree of scrutiny to it. My defense in depth probably is still going to rely on my financial controls, my processes, and my people. But ultimately, you can at least do that analysis. And that's actually become an incredibly popular way to use our threat intel to figure out, of all the domains that are emailing you, which ones are sending attacks to people, which ones are not doing DMARC and the correct authentication protocols, and which ones are seeing a lot of lookalike domains. All of that is actually pretty observable, even if you are still, to some extent, always at the end of the day at the mercy of the security policies and processes of others that you don't fully control.
So is the next iteration of your security maturity and security roadmap also keeping an eye on your vendors and supply chain? I mean, from a attack surface reduction kind of model where we're looking at everything external to us, looking for doppelgangers, watching DNS, like all of the things that these companies are now monitoring. I wonder when it's going to start to include these supply chain and vendors, and you have to basically opt in order to do business from procurement.
It's a good point. And procurement systems themselves are fairly vulnerable. particularly because you have a lot of actors that want to get themselves created in the procurement system and are trying really, really hard to get that access because they know that that's the gateway to money. For organizations that have good controls, for smaller organizations, they still do things like change wire instructions based on emails. So they're going to be lower hanging fruit for some period of time. When it comes to the attack surface reduction, though, what we're really talking about is people. And I think the single most valuable view that we've put together for organizations lately is a view in terms of, you might have 100,000 employees, but how many of them are actually getting interesting attacks on a regular basis? It's probably about 5%. It might actually even be smaller than that. Some of it might be distribution lists, but it's not going to be everybody. So your attack surface is maybe on the people side, not as large as you think it is. At the same point in time, not all targets are created equal. Many are much more likely to engage with the social engineering than their coworkers. And identifying that in statistically significant ways, there's lots of ways to do it, of course. You want to be looking at things like who does their training, who clicks on links that are actually malicious, who is using MFA across all their accounts, all those sorts of things as data points to further shrink what is the riskiest portion of your people-based attack surface. And then, of course, you do want to overlay on that what actually matters. Who's getting attacked, who's likely to fall for the social engineering the attack depends on, and who has access to something at the end of the day that really matters to you, whether that's information, the ability to move money, maybe it's IT privilege if you're worried about a ransomware attack. If you put that analysis together, you can get down to usually a couple of hundred people that carry around most of the risk. And shrinking that pool and better protecting those people has really meaningful results in terms of risk mitigation.
I mean, that's what pen tests, that's what good security companies should be doing. And that's what the good companies that are doing this are looking at, the business risk. I mean, you're right, focusing that 90% of effort on the 10% of people or business critical assets that matter and mapping out what those risks are and trying to put mitigating strategies together for that. I think that's a much better approach. And again, there's not that many people that are actually looking at the business risk or putting together these analysis and statistics like you guys are. So bravo.
Thanks. Yeah, I totally agree also. And I think, the security leaders that are the most successful are the ones that can speak the language of business risk. And we in the vendor side of things don't usually make that very easy. So anything we can do in that direction generally helps.
Definitely. All right, Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly. That was really good stuff.
It's been a pleasure.
Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Proofpoint to learn more. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.